Sunset on Wednesday, July 5th marked the beginning of the 17th day of the fourth month in the biblical calendar, the month known as Tammuz. This day is the start of a period of mourning in the Jewish tradition called the 3 weeks. This 3-week period begins with a fast on the 17th of the month and ends with a fast on the 9th day of the 5th month known as Av. Tradition teaches that on the 17th of Tammuz, Moses broke the tablets of the covenant, the original 10 commandments. The 17th of Tammuz is also believed to be the date that the Roman rulers stopped allowing sacrifices to be made during the Second Temple period in 69 BC. Tradition also teaches that both the first and second temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av, also known as Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is considered to be the saddest day in the history of the Jewish people. The Sabbath before Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Hazon, which means the Sabbath of vision. The Haftorah portion that is read on this special Sabbath is Isaiah 1, verses 1 through 27, which begins with the words, "the vision of Isaiah," hence the name Hazon, or vision. In this passage, the heinous transgressions by Israel are recounted, as well as God's rejection of their acts of worship. However, reconciliation will come to the people when they cease to do evil and learn to do good. Reflecting on this passage is a way to prepare one's heart for the upcoming day of destruction on Tisha B'Av. The Sabbath after Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Nachamu, which means the Sabbath of comfort. The Haftorah portion that is read on this special Sabbath is Isaiah 40, verses 1 through 46. In this passage, it begins with the words Nachamu, or comfort. "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God." Again, this is where we get the name of the Sabbath, called Shabbat Nachamu. This passage in Isaiah 40 provides words of consolation, looking back at Tisha B'Av and the events that happened on this day. The passage lets mourners know that following the destruction, a day of restoration is coming. Shabbat Nachamu is the first of 7 Haftarot of consolation, all taken from the book of Isaiah. In other words, following Tisha B'Av, the next 7 Haftorah portions that are read on Shabbat deliver a message of comfort leading up to Yom Teruah, or the day of the sounding of the shofar, also called Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. I'm mentioning this now because while there are a lot of themes and topics here that can be taught on, I will not be touching on these motifs this year. Maybe as we get closer to Yom Teruah, we can bring these things up, but over the next few weeks, I'm not going to be addressing them. And since Tisha B'Av begins tonight at sunset, I would like to briefly touch on Shabbat Hazon, the Sabbath of vision, which was last Shabbat. Just want to take a quick look at Isaiah 10 through 15 from chapter 1. Chapter 10 begins, "Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the instruction of our God, you people of Gomorrah." Here we see the people of Israel are being connected with Sodom and Gomorrah because of the way their disobedience and the way that they are not following after God. They're walking contrary to his commands. Verse 11 says, "What are your multiplied sacrifices to me, says the Lord? I have had enough of burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed cattle, and I take no pleasure in the blood of bulls, lambs, and goats." Here we see that he is rejecting their sacrifices. He's rejecting those things that, although he's commanded, he's telling them that he does not accept these gifts from the people. "When you come to appear before me, who requires of you this trampling of my courts? Bring your worthless offerings no longer. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbath, the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure iniquity and the solemn assembly. I hate your new moon festivals and your appointed feasts. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them." He doesn't want to accept the sacrifices that they bring on the festivals, nor is he accepting their worship on these festival days that he's actually required them to observe. Incense is symbolic of prayer, and he says their incense is an abomination. He's rejecting their prayer. Even in verse 15, it says, "So when you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Yes, even though you multiply prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are covered with blood." Here the Lord, through Isaiah, is mentioning the things he commanded Israel to do for him, These are the things that they were supposed to do when worshiping him. But here he is saying that he hates them. He's rejecting them. It's not because they're doing them wrong. It's not because they were doing them they weren't doing them in the right way. It's because they were doing them with the wrong heart, with the wrong motive, not out of love for God, but out of religious duty. And we see that if you would continue going through Isaiah, you see how they were living contrary to what God had expected for them. So it's clear here, one thing that we can learn is that people can be very religious and pious on the outside, doing the things that they're supposed to, but at the same time, they can be very far from God on the inside. So far that he rejects their worship and does not listen to their prayers. We start following Torah and observing Shabbat and the feast days out of love for him. When we read the words of the Bible and we see that we've been neglecting these things because we've been walking in Protestant Christianity or Catholicism, whatever it might be, and we find the truth of the Torah, we are moved in our hearts to start walking in his ways. And so we do these things out of love for him. We do it because we want to be obedient to his word. We're not trying to look outwardly holier than thou, or at least that shouldn't be our goal. And if it is, we need to check our hearts. It's not about us being better than anyone else. It's about our obedience out of love for our God. I grew up in the Catholic Church and I served as an altar boy from a young age. And being at the front of the church with the priest looking out toward the pews gave me a perspective that most people have not seen. I remember there were always those people who would say the liturgy faster than anyone else in order to be the first to stand or to sit or to kneel. If you've never been to a Catholic service and experienced a church that is led through liturgy, there are opportunities for people to respond to the words of the priest through the liturgy. And after certain parts of the service, you're supposed to stand up, or you're supposed to sit down, or you're supposed to kneel. There's various things that you're supposed to do. Well, being up at the front as an altar boy, I would see people who were sitting in the very first row, in the front pew, and they'd recite these prayers. They'd recite these responses, and they would say it so fast, and they would jump up because they wanted to be the first people to stand up, and they'd kind of look around to make sure that they were the first ones to stand up. For them, it was about a show. For them, at least that's the way it appeared. For them, they wanted to stand up and look around and make sure that everyone saw that they were the first ones to stand up, as if they knew more than everyone else. Now, I do think that liturgy can be a beautiful tool to help a congregation in worship, in communal worship. But when memorizing it and reciting it is turned into a status symbol, as if I know more than you, it's no longer about worshiping God. It's about making yourself look more important than other people. I've been walking in Torah in Messianic communities now since 2000. And during this time, I've known people who fell into the trappings of Rabbinic Judaism. They became enamored with the ritual and the outward appearance. They thought that living according to the strict and rigorous rules of the Orthodox would bring them closer to God. It seemed to me, the more they learned and the more that they practiced, the farther they actually were from God. Most of these people ended up denying Yeshua as Messiah, and they converted to Rabbinic Judaism. In every case, it wasn't long before they got overwhelmed by the Rabbinic tradition and they got burned out, and they ended up leaving Judaism. But in doing so, they also ended up walking away from God altogether. The Jewish traditions are beautiful. And coming from the Catholic background, as I've sat in Messianic communities who do follow liturgy and who do adopt the Jewish traditions, I can see the similarities, and I can understand why these things are attractive to people. I like it. I like the liturgy. I used to wear a kippah and I used to wear a talit during worship time. But I can see how these things aren't enough for some, and they want more, and they want more of the Jewish tradition. They want to learn more of the Jewish way. I can see how they can be enamored and suckered in and eventually drawn away from Yeshua, drawn away from Messiah and into Jewish tradition. But the interesting thing is, I have met a few former rabbinic Jews. And after walking away from rabbinic Judaism, all of them have also walked away from the rabbinic tradition, because to them it was a burden. They knew it didn't get them closer to God. It hindered their relationship with Him. They've told me, several of these people have told me that it was a chore, that they would read through the Sidurs in the morning and in the afternoon and the evening when they were supposed to. They memorized it and they read it so fast that they were just trying to get through it. It wasn't even a prayer to God. They weren't even considering what they were saying. They just wanted to get through it so they can continue on with their day. It wasn't bringing them closer to God. Because of what I saw and how rabbinic Judaism had drawn people away from God, and the experience that I had with these rabbinic people who actually walked away from rabbinic tradition, these are two reasons why I no longer keep the Jewish traditions that I did in the past. And I never really did a lot, but the ones that I did, we've kind of backed away from. Not all, but many of them. We still usher in Shabbat with a large meal with the family. We light the candles and we recite blessings. We close Shabbat with Havdalah, with a Havdalah candle, and we recite the blessings and sing the songs. And so there are some things that we still do. But I don't want to encourage anyone, any new believer or anyone who's new to Torah, I don't want to encourage them down the path of rabbinic Judaism. I've seen people go down that path, and it's a fruitless effort. It takes you away from God, and I don't think it's something that people should get into when they start walking in Torah. They should have some years under their belt of studying Torah and understand the rabbinic tradition before they get into it, because you don't want to get caught in that trap. So these are just some thoughts that came to mind as I was considering Tisha B'Av, as I was considering the 17th of Tammuz in this 3-week period. Honestly, I've never participated in the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, nor have I participated in the fast of Tisha B'Av. I think these are great things for us to focus on. I think these are good reminders of what happened to the Jewish people. I think these are things for us to consider in our own lives, to look at these principles and apply them to our own lives. And I think it's a wake-up call for us to get ready for the upcoming festivals, the fall festivals. The month of Av is the 5th month in the biblical calendar, and pretty soon we're going to get to the 6th month, the month that we prepare for the fall festivals. So it's just around the corner, so let's get our hearts and let's get our minds ready for the fall festivals that'll be here before we know it. So during this season of these 3 weeks, the period between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, it's good for us to reflect on how God corrected Israel during a time when she was willfully living in sin, when she was allowing sin within her borders. It's good for us to look at what happened to them and to take stock of our own lives, for us to reflect on our own lives and our own homes and consider what sins are we allowing into our own homes, into our houses, into our families. It's good for us to consider our walk in Torah. It's good for us to ask ourselves, is our worship, is our expression of Torah because we truly love God and want to be obedient to Him? Or are we just putting on a show and going through the motions?